if you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
I'd like to welcome back Jonna McLean to Horse Chats today. Jonna's talked to us many times before. If you haven't listened to Jonna before, just go back to horsechats.com, search for Jonna or search for McLean. But last time we talked about the evolution of the horse-human relationship. We did part 1, so this is part 2. Now, even if you are really keen to listen to Jonna, at least listen to, say, his first episode where he talks a bit about himself and his background, then talk about this evolution of the horse-human relationship, which was episode 816. But look, before we do that, I'd just like to remind you about International Horse College. And if you've got the same vision as International Horse College, which is to have a world where people safely appreciate, respect and enjoy their horses, and the horses appreciate, respect and enjoy their people, have a look at their website, internationalhorsecollege.com, registered trainee organisation 31352, or talk to the friendly team about a course that you might be interested in enrolling to find out a little bit more. And details on the website too, the phone number and contact details. Now, Jonna, welcome back.
Thank you, Glenys, and hopefully we'll have a clear line. The storms have all passed now, so hopefully this one will go smoothly.
Well, I was certainly a bit worried. We tried this sort of 2 nights ago and, there was a lot of interference, and then your phone was out last night. So, we sort of had a little bit of a hiccup there, but pretty excited to keep going. Now, we talked about the evolution of the horse-human relationship last time, and I think we talked about 5,500 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and sort of took us all the way through. We talked about chariots and how we used horses for farming and then even started riding them. But I think you were just going to go over something about the introduction of metal shoes. Do you want to just have a quick chat about that? And then we'll talk about some more modern times.
Okay. So, Glenys, they think around about 400 BC, they came across in graves that were buried with people that the invention of the hipper sandal, which was just a leather sandal to cover the horse's foot to protect it from sharp objects and abrading away, so they could then ride further and longer with those leather sandals. And in Asia they used more natural products. When I say more natural products, I mean more plant-based products. And it's really not really until about, they think, around about 400 AD, so 800 years later, that the first evidence of metal shoes came about. And then ultimately they were made out of bronze, which would be absolutely amazing to think of that nowadays, because bronze is quite a semi-precious metal. So they used bronze to put on their horses' feet. But the real reason behind it was because the longevity of the horse's wool and its foot as a protection mechanism was the primary objective. And so they think that around about 400 BC to 500 BC, the very first evidence of nailed-on metal shoes were found in a Frankish tomb. So that's a long time ago. So farrier it's an ancient form. It's really been going for a long, long time.
Certainly has, and we've certainly evolved quite a lot from the initial hipper sandals.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. So, Jonna, just taking us back to last time, we sort of went through, we talked a little bit about dressage, but I think we sort of got to, 1800s. What about the early 1900s? Tell us a little bit about the evolution, because we've talked about the evolution of the horse, but it's really that horse-human relationship that we're focused on now.
Well, the 1900s, earlier in the 1900s, of course, we had the very first Olympic Games where eventing was carried out. So there was the rise of sport and lots of people were still riding horses. And it was also the beginning of the industrialisation age, so the mechanisation age or the Industrial Revolution. So engines were being devised and they were going to be used for transport of all sorts, whether it be on the farm or from an industrial point of view, including ships. You notice that at that time there was a big transfer from sailing ships to steam boiler ships, etc. And of course, the very first consequence of that is that horses then were not required as much as they were because now there were engines about. However, in saying that, there was still a huge number of horses used in the First World War. The number of horses in 1900 was 21 million, and that peaked about 1915, which of course is the First World War, was 26 million was the population of horses that they thought. So there was a huge shift after that time and the advent of tanks. So, and of course, we all know about the Light Horse Brigade, and we also talk about other brigades that then became mechanised. They were no longer on horses anymore. They were now in tanks or in armoured vehicles, of course, and so the horses weren't required anymore. But in the First World War and also in the Second World War, huge amounts of horses, donkeys and mules were used for the transport of all sorts of logistics, armaments and food supplies, medical supplies, carrying out the wounded. And also, of course, when I briefly talked about eventing before, we were still using the messaging system on horseback to get swift messages to and from the front line back to the command post so we could take on-time decisions could be made. And that's sort of where the rise of eventing came, is that horses were then used to obviously go cross-country and become very, very tough in terms of their endurance and their stamina, and that was really the cross-country phase. And then it evolved into also, we used the show jumping phase as a way of being able to have the dexterity and manoeuvrability of the horse over a fence, and exactly the same for ground control, being able to manoeuvre the horse very accurately in close combat situations, and that's where the emergence of dressage came from. And in saying that, just continuing that, and another ancient sport that my father was actually involved in heavily, I remember him talking to me about it, was tent pegging. And tent pegging is, not many people know about tent pegging. We didn't do it at Pony Club. I would have loved to have done it. I'm not sure why we didn't do it, but tent pegging is the art of being able to ride your horse in a straight line, so often in teams, and you ride in a straight line and you have to use a lance or a spear or something with a point on the end of it, and you have to gallop straight down a long run and then pick up a peg. And the peg is made of something, wood or bamboo or compressed bark or whatever it is, driven into the ground, and you gallop your horse flat out down this straight and then you pick up the peg. The idea of this was that, of course, in army camps, we had heaps and heaps of soldiers being in tents, etc., in big long rows of tents, and so the opposing armies would maraud straight down the hill on these horses, and they would just lift up the tent pegs that would trap all the soldiers in their tents. And of course, the rest is history. So that's the emergence of tent pegging. So there are lots of things to do with horse history that has been centred around war and the evolution of training and tactics and the gear used, etc., etc. It's a long list.
It is, isn't it? You know, you're thinking about the history and the history of horses and all the time that we've covered with them. Tent pegging, is that a purely Australian sport?
No, it's a worldwide sport.
Okay.
It's, when I was in India, this is quite a while ago, 2014, I was in India in a show jump team, and they gave us a demonstration of tent pegging. Their army, still to this day, in order to go into the army or the Air Force or even in the Navy, they have to do compulsory horse riding, and they spend 2 years doing that. And part of that is a display, a cavalry display, and then another one was tent pegging. And it was just amazing how adept these riders were, and the ponies that they were galloping down, how accurately they could do it. It was just amazing. That was the very first time that I'd seen it in a competition sense. So I'd seen it on film and I'd seen it on video, but I had never seen it in real life. So it's a very, very widespread sport. But I think it was, I'd have to do more research, but I have a feeling that it's a very British sport.
Okay. Now, thinking about the horses, and I think you said 21 million, and then First World War, 26 million. Are there more horses today or there were more then?
No, well, there was more horses then, but there are more horses used in sport now. The difficulty in trying to get numbers, America have very good statistics on how many horses they have, but it's actually not that easy to find out the total number of horses on the planet. So we're talking about horses that are used, for sport and recreation, and that includes racing, et cetera, So there are less horses than there were then. And, of course, that would be true because so many people depended upon horses for their livelihoods and for their transportation, getting to school, just going to work, and moving materials about. It was, when you think about how many cars are on the road today, if we didn't have cars, we'd all be riding horses. That would be a lot of horses.
Yes. Yes. So you don't have the details in. So there were
No,
more than...
I don't have the total global number. I know that in America there are 150,000 mares covered each year for the American stud book. So there's at least 100,000 attempts at new horses trying to be created, and that's just for racing alone. That's not including anything else. And that's quite a large number, considering that we don't use horses now as a necessity. We just use horses for...
But I think the popularity of the sport, and also not just the popularity of the sport, the popularity of things like equine-assisted therapy, using horses to help in a much broader idea, so that having a horse or being in contact with a horse is not just about the riding. There's so many other benefits to have horses. Yep.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Because the number of horses declined, and we're talking about the wars, do you know how many horses died in total of the Great Wars?
They think around about 8 million, and that included donkeys and mules, which is a huge amount.
It is.
Germany alone lost 2.7 million in the Great War. So, that is a huge amount, isn't it? That is just bigger than belief. That's amazing. Pretty amazing.
Yep. So thinking about, the amount of horses that are there today, what do you think is the future of horse sports in the world?
Well, it is a really big question, but I think the question has to be centered around, humane treatments of horses, because we are now so much in the public eye. Everywhere we go, there's a camera, there's somebody filming you. We have to be so careful with what we do and what we say in the treatment of not just horses but everything. But getting back to horses, I think that one of the things that is going to really shape the way that we do things is the public's perspective on what they think is cruel and what we think is cruel. The days are gone by now. It was not that long ago I was looking at some photos of I was playing cushion polo as a kid at Pony Club, and I'm hanging off my horse, and his mouth is open and his eyes are really wide, and the horse doesn't look very happy at all, but we're all having fun. I think those days are probably, not that accepted anymore. So we have to try and make sure that the future welfare of the horse and the safety of the rider is being preserved and promoted all the way through. And, of course, now we have things like disabled Olympic Games, and people even ride horses in disabled Olympic Games. So we have to really make sure that people stay safe. So in order to do that, I think that the way forward, in my own opinion, is to really make sure that our horses are really well trained, because really well trained horses are very comfortable in their own skin, and to use an anthropomorphic term, they seem quite happy and settled in themselves. So any animal that is actually really well trained is quite settled and comfortable. So I think that we have to really make sure that we train our horses really well and make sure that we don't use any conflicting signals on a day-to-day basis, or even when we change riders, we give our riders an adequate brief as to what we should expect from this horse and what they should do about it. So at least there's some consistency in the application of those signals that can then flow on to the next rider after that. So I think that the future is actually all about horse welfare and making sure that we don't, we're not seen to be, mining horses or using horses in a way that is really purely only for our own ego to the detriment of the horse. And that isn't just the horse world, that's probably the animal kingdom all told, especially the companion animal world when we talk about dogs and cats and especially horses. So even now in Australia, it is, and I've said this before, I think on another interview, it is so affordable to have a horse. I teach students, and they're full-time students, and they have horses. And there's no way known I could have afforded a horse when I was a student. I was riding everybody else's horses because I couldn't afford to get one. But now it's really easy to have a horse. You know, you get given a horse and all you've got to do is find a paddock. And Australia is great like that. There's always plenty of space to pop a horse in there and care for it and ride it and do whatever you'd like to do with it. So I think the future is actually all about horses' welfare, and understanding the science behind that is going to be not always in line with the public opinion. And somewhere along the line, we have to have a very intelligent discussion with the public opinion versus the scientific community and say, okay, well, what is the proper and just way to be able to take this whole thing forward from a ethical sense and a humane sense?
Well, I'm just thinking, because, you know, you're saying that your opinions have changed, you know, just to do with horse sports, with the emphasis on horse welfare. And, Jonna, you've been really at the forefront, you and Andrew, you know, of that science-based research, you know, so that we know that the horse is communicating in this way and this is what happens. And even if the horse looks quiet, when the pulse rate goes up like that, you know, there's something going on. Is the rest of the world like that? I mean, I suppose this is a chat all in itself, isn't it? You know, just to start off and say, well, however many years back this research was happened, and then we've complemented it with this and this and this. Yeah, I suppose the world is changing, though, isn't it? I'd like to think that the world is changing. It's not just one small little area and a couple of people, but the world is a lot more accepting now. We start talking about horse welfare and the requirements of the horses.
Yes, and the requirements of horses in different countries is different, so it's not the same the world over. It'd be lovely if it was true. But I was talking before about when I was in India, we were just talking about when I was looking at the tent pegging, and the way that they cared for their horses was completely different to the way that we care for our horses in Australia. And the things that they were doing were quite shocking to us. And yet the horses seemed quite comfortable with it. They didn't mind the fact that they were treated in a certain way when they were being tacked up or when they were being ridden, because they were really ridden just like machines there, and a lot of countries are like that. So we can't then say, okay, well, you're a country that doesn't treat your horses as well as us, you're going to have to do better than that. All we can do is try and set an example of how things should be done, and hopefully people will follow suit. And gradually over the time that has happened, and I've seen a huge change in the last 10 years, it's been absolutely enormous and life-changing for me. My own experiences with that have been that now I'm really careful with what I say, what I do, how I go about it. And yes, sometimes you do have to use pressure, but we have to be careful we don't confuse pressure with cruelty, because cruelty is a definition that means that when you are applying pressure to the horse and it can't escape the pressure no matter what it does, then that's deemed to be cruel. Whereas in training, you may have to use some pressure to motivate the horse to do an action. As long as you take it away, then it's not cruel. So people have to become quite conversant with the terminologies that bound all these aspects. So it's an informative process for the public. It's an informative process for everybody. And, you know, it's being led by research now is just amazing how much research has been done in the last 10 years in horses alone and in dogs, I know, as well. But unfortunately, it's not a global thing yet. All we can do is set our standards and say this is what we accept. And we've seen this in racing, you know. We've seen the change of the way that how often the whip is used in racing, and the cut or the style of whip that is used now doesn't hurt as much because it's got a great higher surface area. It makes a louder sound, but apparently doesn't hurt as much. And the number of times you can use it is also being governed and looked at, and that's the same in the standardbred industry as well. So, you know, all these changes are happening, and if they're happening in those sports, well, then that's really going to be the pro forma for the future.
Yeah. Jonna, that would be great if we talk a little bit in more depth. You know, we're talking about the evolution of the horse-human relationship, and if we can sort of have that part 3 and bring it through and talk about, you know, focusing on the history of, you know, of the science-based research within the equine industry. But if we can talk about that next time, that would be great. And I think that would be also very helpful, you know, about just that relationship that we have with our horses.
Well, that's right, and we understand it's not always about science. Sometimes it's about, really making sure that the people, and you touched on this before, is that having companion animals for the welfare of people's mental capabilities and physical capabilities and all those things. There's roles there for horses in a really, really big way, and we've only just starting to scratch the surface. We don't really know how beneficial all these things are. It's only been done in the last 10 years or so, and we're just starting to see the benefits of those changes now. And so that's the future. The future is actually, really being able to enjoy the companion aspect of our horses and treating them, likewise.
Yeah.
It definitely is another topic.
No, sounds great. Jonna, I've got to say thanks very much for today. Well, thanks for all your chats, because you come, you do the research. There's things like this that it's not, I know a lot of the training you've done because you've done it so many times, bringing foals on and keeping them going forward because you do it so much. But going back and checking out all this history and just getting everything, just to make sure that it's all right. So certainly, we appreciate the work that you put in prior to the chats as well as the chats, and looking forward to catching up with you again for part 3, the evolution of the horse-human relationship. But before you go, if people would like to contact you, they can go to horsechats.com, search for Jonna, search for McLean, and I know the Train to Win page. What's the best way? Is it the Train to Win Facebook page?
Yeah, the Train to Win Facebook page works, or my email address, which is jonnamclean@gmail.com, JONNAMCLEAN @gmail.com. That'll work as well. Either, that's fine. And if people don't get a reply, I always encourage them to pester me, because I do get a little forgetful.
You do get busy, yeah. Jonna, thanks very much again, and we'll talk to you again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Glenys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please comment, rate and subscribe. If you'd like any changes or recommendations for guests, then please contact us through horsechats.com. And while you're online, have a look at the government-accredited courses at internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.